Do you believe that a vengeful spirit can borrow a priest's body to return to her dead child? Do you dare to imagine an innocent child becoming a bridge between the world of the living and the departed? And are you ready to witness the death of a loyal friend just to save a soul too young to understand what waits beyond the darkness? Welcome back to the Whisper Horror channel, where secrets are never laid to rest. If you love chilling stories mixed with tragedy, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and leave a comment below to let us know that you're still watching from the other side of the screen. Today we will step into the haunting second part of the story, where a dead mother's lullaby still echoes from deep within the forest, and where a dog named Bruno knew what was coming, but no one listened to him. Gusts of wind battered against the second-floor window, like the hands of a small child knocking constantly to find a way in. In room 207, Father Elias lay on a single bed, with one arm already bandaged. The pale blue light from the heart monitor cast a rhythmic glow on the white wall, like a reminder that life was still shaky and fragile. He had dozed off, but his sleep was anything but peaceful. The final dose of painkillers at 9 o'clock was only strong enough to contain the physical pain, but it could not soothe the obsession of what he had witnessed. The doctor told him he needed a few more days of rest, but in Elias's mind, they were only mortals who could not understand the eternity of the darkness. In the hallway, an old fluorescent light flickered like a droopy eye, then faded into silence. Claire, the night shift nurse, had just finished her last pile of paperwork. She walked down the deserted hallway with a tray of late-night medication in her hand. Her soft footsteps were swallowed by the stillness. In the pharmacy room, she bent down, alone, preparing syringes of sedatives and antibiotics. Just then, the power flickered again, enough to cast a strange shadow onto the window frame. The door behind Claire creaked open, little by little, like an invitation. Claire looked up. No one was there, just an empty hallway, and a deep, dark space behind the slightly ajar door. She let out a soft, weary laugh. "I must be tired," she muttered, shaking her head to herself, trying to shake off the chill running down her spine. But when she turned her back to close the cabinet, she saw in the glass reflection that it wasn't her own shadow. It was the figure of a long-haired woman, her head tilted at an unnatural angle, her hair hanging down and covering most of her face, revealing only one stark white eye, as hollow as a black hole of pain. Claire whipped around. It was empty. It was just her own lonely shadow. She turned her back again, rushing to close the cabinet, but this time, two pale hands like a corpse's, with long gaunt fingernails, suddenly tightened around her neck from behind. The nails scratched her skin, but she couldn't let out a single cry. The syringe in Claire's hand stabbed back into her own neck. Blood shot out in a thin dark red streak on her white blouse. A soft thud echoed, but it was only loud enough to make the door shake violently, as if it too was terrified. 2 minutes later, Nurse Claire walked out of the pharmacy room. Her blouse was not stained, her eyes were empty and soulless, but her hands were still holding the medicine tray perfectly. Inside that body, Claire's soul had completely vanished. Elias woke up, but not because of the noise. He sensed a shadow standing silently next to him. "Claire?" he asked, his voice still heavy with sleep. The nurse nodded, not answering. "I don't think there will be any more injections. The doctor said the dosage would be lowered." The nurse smiled, but it was a smile that lacked human warmth or softness. It was a smile made of muscle, of mechanical imitation, a grotesque smile. "Just a light dose, Father," the voice whispered, like a cold wind blowing through a wooden door crack. Elias frowned, a sense of unease seeping through his every nerve. "Claire, are you okay?" The nurse stepped closer. Her hand gripped the syringe, the needle glinting like a silver knife. Elias tried to get up, but an invisible force pinned him tightly to the bed. His eyes widened, and cold sweat ran down his face. "You." Nurse Claire leaned close, whispering in his ear with a voice that was not her own. "My little girl, you stopped me. Now you will show the way." The needle plunged into his neck, deep, then quickly pulled out. A blast of cold, icy air rushed into his veins, spreading throughout his body. Elias's eyes opened wide, and his whole body jolted violently in spasms. The heart rate on the monitor flickered wildly, then slowed down. Elias left room 207. His footsteps were slow, his back straight. He no longer needed a crutch. A doctor walking by recognized him. "Father Elias, where are you going at this hour?" Elias stopped, turned, and nodded gently. "I feel much better. I have urgent business. I need to go." The doctor was about to say something, but there was no reason to stop him. He frowned as he watched Elias's figure, feeling an oddness that he couldn't name, and then continued with his work. In room 207, behind the bathroom door, Nurse Claire's body was crammed inside. Her eyes were wide, soulless, and her fingernails were broken from one last desperate attempt. No one found her. Michael had just opened the door, intending to visit Elias for a little while before going home. He saw Elias walking toward his car at that very moment. "Father Elias," Michael called out. Elias turned around. The turn was a little slower, a little more crooked than normal, like a machine learning to imitate a human. "Michael," he replied, "I'm about to leave, but you haven't been discharged yet. I feel better, and I have something to do right away. I can't wait." Michael nodded, confused. The feeling of unease in his chest grew stronger. "If you need anything, please call us." "No need," Elias said, then walked quickly toward the car. When he opened the door, the reflection in the glass was not Elias. It was the figure of a long-haired woman, with her head bowed. His gaunt arm opened the door, but the reflection moved in a ghostly, bizarre way. The car left the hospital, speeding into the thick blackness of the city, carrying a new terror. Another nurse found Claire. Her body was cold. The police were called immediately. The surveillance camera only recorded Claire entering Elias's room, but she never came out. After that it was Elias, walking out of the room alone, with a completely different look. The record stated, suspect Father Elias fled the hospital and murdered the nurse. A warrant was issued right after. No one knew that he was on his way back to the cabin in the woods, the place where the mother who died years ago had just gotten a new body to use, and a new guide to find her lonely daughter. The old car, with a Colorado license plate, made a light screeching sound as it stopped on the dirt path covered in dry pine needles. The heavy wheels crushed the damp layer of leaves, creating a dry rustling sound, like breaking bones. The cabin appeared, swallowed by the shadows of the trees and the evening mist, standing there like a silent scar in the old forest. The cold air burrowed into every crack in the rotting wood, making the windows shake and rattle, as if trembling at something that had already been decided. The car door opened. Father Elias got out. His cloak was still stained with dried blood, a bizarre contrast to the white bandage wrapped around his hand. But his footsteps no longer carried the weariness or the determination of a man of faith. They were heavy and stiff, as if his body was just a puppet being manipulated by an invisible hand deep beneath the skin. Elias's face now had an unusual stillness. His eyes were wide and unblinking, and for a moment when the faint light from the cabin window shone out and reflected in his pupils, one could see a blurry image, like a haunting ghost. The face of a woman with long, unkempt hair covering most of her face, revealing only a pair of red eyes, visible through the biological glass. That was Margaret Blackwell, the sorrowful soul who had never found peace. The cabin door creaked and opened on its own, like a welcome, as Elias stepped inside. A blast of cold air flowed over his shoulder, like an invisible hand touching his skin. Margaret stopped at the doorframe, as if needing another moment to feel every particle of dust in the air. The smell of the firewood that hadn't completely gone out from last night, the smell of wine spilled on the wooden table, the smell of a child's hair still lingering on a pillow. She walked slowly, each step like she was treading on fragments of memories. Her right hand lightly brushed the wall, stopping at a small crack that her husband himself had once made in a fit of wild rage. Her footsteps stopped at the wooden table. She bent down and picked up a small, thin blonde hair caught on the sofa cushion. Elias's face twitched slightly. Beneath the trembling skin was a spiritual pain being reborn. "My daughter," a hoarse whisper came from his cracked lips. She walked into the kitchen. Her hand brushed over every cabinet and drawer, like an obsession searching for something that was lost. The broken glass, a fragile piece of evidence from the night before's intrusion, still lay on the floor. She bent down to pick up a shard. Blood seeped from her finger, but there was no sign of pain. The blood dripped onto the floor and lightly smoked, as if it no longer belonged to Elias's body. Then Margaret went down to the basement. The wooden stairs creaked with every step, like a lament. The basement was so dark that all the light seemed to have been sucked out, even though the sun was still peeking through the leaves above. She didn't need a light. Her eyes had been dead for a long time, but they could still see things that did not belong to this world. At the end of the basement, Margaret stood in front of an old mottled cement wall. It was no accident that she stopped there. From somewhere, a weak, inaudible call like an echo came from behind the cold concrete. A strange mark appeared in her eyes. A brass circle with a Latin inscription, Non revertitur nisi in luce veritatis. It was a holy seal left by a previous believer, perhaps her very own husband, Ronald Blackwell.
Margaret reached out and touched the brass seal. Crack! A dry sound echoed in her mind. Her fingers started to blister, the skin cracked open, and the veins under her skin seemed to boil, but she did not stop. Her eyes, red like fresh blood, burned away the pain. The seal broke in two. The layer of cement cracked and crumbled. Behind the wall was a small, wet and rotten stone alcove, and inside was the withered corpse of a child. The little girl was curled up in a corner, her eyes still open, her eye sockets hollowed out as if all life had been drained from her. In her hand was a headless wooden doll, which was moldy and gnawed away by time. Margaret collapsed. Her hands trembled as they reached out and touched the cold body. A faint sound, like a gust of wind, drifted into her ear. "Mommy!" The corpse began to shake gently. It wasn't because of rats, nor was it because of the wind. It was truly moving. A faint black smoke rose from the child's chest, twisting into the shape of a little girl. Her face was identical to Margaret's when she was young, but her eyes were just two deep black pits. "Clara, my child," Margaret whispered, then hugged the child. A scream was choked in her chest. It wasn't a scream of pain, but a scream of a cursed reunion, something that should never have happened. The two figures, one physical and one spiritual, merged into one. There was no longer a boundary between mother and child. There was no longer the breath of life. There was only the curse that had just been awakened. Margaret's eyes opened. Now, they were two black pupils, like pebbles at the bottom of a deep abyss, and from below the ground, a childish, hoarse voice echoed, "I want to play with that little girl. I want her to stay with us, forever." The next day, local police, following the GPS signal from Elias's car at the hospital, tracked the trail and arrived at the cabin. The house was dead silent, an unusual silence. Outside, they saw a chaotic scene. All the luggage, clothes and toys of Michael's family were thrown outside, scattered on the lawn like fragments of a happy life. The bags were torn open, as if someone had ransacked everything in a fit of rage. An officer drew his gun and slowly walked into the cabin. A cold wind blew down the hallway, carrying the smell of decay. Upstairs, no trace. On the ground floor, no sign of life. When they went down to the basement, their flashlight shone on a body that had already started to rot, which was Father Elias. His hand was still clutching the cross. On his chest, there was a small puncture wound where his soul had departed. His face was purple, and his mouth was open as if trying to scream something before he died. At the same time, Michael's car also arrived. He had returned to the cabin to pack their luggage. Rachel was in the back with Lily, not leaving her side for a second. Bruno, in the back storage area, had a bandage around his stomach, and was still weak. As soon as the car pulled up to the tree line, Bruno suddenly raised his head. His body jerked violently, his eyes wide, and his ears stood up straight. A low growl hissed in his throat. It was not the whimper of an injured dog, but the growl of a guard dog giving an alarm. "Michael, do you hear something?" Rachel whispered, her voice trembling. Bruno started barking fiercely, not toward the cabin, but toward Lily's car seat. Lily turned around, her small face full of fear. "Bruno, what's wrong?" Rachel hugged her daughter tighter, while Michael frowned, a feeling of unease surging in his chest. Something is not right. The cabin was still silent, but in the basement, two black shadows, one large and one small, had started crawling up the rotting wooden steps, with one single purpose. Michael's family returned after a vacation that was now, in their minds, nothing short of a nightmare. The small house and familiar neighborhood brought a sense of ultimate security, like a warm blanket soothing their emotional wounds. Rachel went back to her mundane housework. The sound of running water and soft music in the kitchen echoed like a hymn of peace. Michael opened his laptop, trying to catch up on the dozens of emails he had left behind after the trip. Lily went to her room. Bruno lay peacefully at the foot of the bed, breathing softly, not looking any different from a normal day. But on the very first night, it seemed that things were not right. Bruno was lying under the warm yellow light of the living room when he suddenly raised his head. His ears perked up, his teeth were bared, and the low growl under his jaw sounded dry and dangerous. He looked toward the back door, where the darkness swallowed the garden, leaving only a vast and desolate yard. Michael checked the entire house, but there was nothing unusual. All the doors were locked, and every corner of the room was quiet. Bruno also lay down after being comforted, but his ears were still perked, as if listening to an invisible sound. That night, Lily suddenly opened her eyes in the middle of the night. She heard someone calling her name, softly like a cold wind blowing through a crack. "Lily! Lily!" The bedroom window was slightly ajar, even though Rachel clearly remembered pulling the curtains and closing it tightly. On the second day, Bruno did not go out to play in the yard even though the door was open. He still lay on the carpet, his ears always perked, showing a state of absolute vigilance. Everything in his eyes seemed like a potential threat. He refused to go for walks or play, only staying close to Lily, not leaving her side for a second. That evening, when Michael and Rachel were watching TV, Lily came out. Her face was dazed, and she was yawning. She said, "Mom and Dad, my friend Clara wants to go outside and play before bed. Can we?" Michael and Rachel looked at each other, stunned. A heavy silence filled the room. "What Clara?" Rachel asked, her voice trembling. Lily just smiled, an innocent smile that made the couple shiver. "My new friend." And so, while the family thought they had escaped a nightmare, a new catastrophe had been quietly following them, hiding under the guise of innocence and children's games. That afternoon, in the park just a few blocks from the house, a place that seemed like an absolutely safe sanctuary. The lawn was covered with red leaves. The late summer wind was still a little warm, but as it blew through the rusty swing sets, it sounded chilling, like a long sigh of time. Rachel sat on a stone bench reading a book, trying to find the piece she had lost. Lily was running around with a red rubber ball, her clear laughter echoing, in complete contrast to the park's stillness. Bruno was lying a little way off, his eyes always following Lily like a sentry. Even though the veterinarian had told him to limit his movement after the injury at the cabin, Bruno refused to stay home. Every time Lily went outside, he would follow closely, as if he no longer trusted any place to be safe. Lily chased the ball, and it rolled toward a dense row of trees, where the afternoon light no longer reached. Rachel was absorbed in her book, not paying attention. Bruno gave a low growl, but did not leave his spot. He looked around, the fur on the back of his neck standing on end, showing an instinctive fear of an invisible threat. And in the quiet gap between the trees, Lily stopped. She stood there, her eyes a little dazed, as if listening to something only she could hear. The wind wasn't blowing, and no leaves were falling, but someone was calling her name. It was very soft and clear. "Lily." A little girl was standing next to the old oak tree. Her long hair was tangled, her old white dress was stained, and her bare feet were covered in dirt, but her face was not scary. On the contrary, it was very much like the little girls in old fairy tale books, gentle, sad, and with strange eyes. "Who are you?" Lily asked, showing no fear at all. Her innocence had been manipulated by an invisible force. "I'm Clara. I live nearby. My mom told me not to go out, but I'm so lonely. Do you want to play hide and seek?" Lily turned to look at her mother, but Rachel was still absorbed in her book, completely unaware that her daughter was facing a deadly danger. Bruno stood up, but at the edge of the trees, he froze. Something made him afraid to cross that boundary. He let out a fierce whine, but both little girls had already vanished into the forest. 10 minutes later, Rachel was startled by Bruno's frantic barking. She looked around, but Lily was nowhere to be seen. Bruno's barking led her toward the tree line at the end of the park. And then, in the long afternoon shadows, she saw Lily standing alone in front of a broken slide. The little girl was holding an old, battered doll. Its blonde hair was singed, and its dress was patched. "Lily, where did you get that doll?" "My friend Clara gave it to me." Rachel looked around. There was no one named Clara here. There were no footprints besides Bruno's and Lily's. She vaguely realized that her daughter had met something that did not belong to this world. That night, Lily held the doll and slept soundly. Bruno lay at the foot of the bed, but his eyes did not close. He stared intently at the dark corner of the room, where the curtain swayed slightly, even though the window was closed. And outside, beyond the glass, a small white shadow appeared for a moment. It wasn't Margaret. It was Clara, squatting, looking inside with sad eyes, but they were unusually wild and full of hatred. The little girl was waiting for her new friend, forever. The sky was strangely gloomy. There was no rain, but heavy clouds were drifting slowly above the park like a nameless omen. Lily was playing tag with Clara, her clear laughter echoing through the trees. Clara looked the same as always, a simple white dress, long black hair, and an innocent smile. She always appeared right when Lily felt sad or lonely, and today, Lily had just turned around, and Clara was already there, holding up a porcelain doll with tangled hair, and a dress just like her own. The two were spinning around the big tree in the middle of the park, when a hoarse, deep voice came from behind. "Let's go, my children. I found him." Clara stopped in her tracks. Lily looked blankly at the woman who had just appeared. Margaret Blackwell. She didn't look like anyone else around them. She wore a long black dress that touched the ground. Her gray hair was tangled and covered one side of her face, and her eyes were like smoldering lumps of coal. Lily didn't feel scared. She just felt that the woman was strangely familiar and warm. Clara moved closer and took Lily's hand. Margaret held out her other hand, as if inviting them. Clara whispered, "Just for a little while. Come with us. It'll be so much fun." Lily nodded, her innocence deceived by the temptation of a curse. At Michael's house, the peace shattered. Bruno suddenly raised his head from where he was lying near the front door. His ears were perked up. His eyes were fixed on the window facing the park. He whined softly, then suddenly howled, a long and desperate cry that tore through the stillness. Rachel was startled, and dropped the spoon she was washing in the sink. The sound of metal hitting porcelain was deafening. Michael had just walked out of his study when Bruno lunged at the door, scratching frantically, trying to burst outside. "What's wrong with him?" Rachel asked, her face confused as she realized a terrifying truth. Bruno let out a long howl, then hit the door hard, like a bell signaling imminent danger. Michael frowned and glanced at his watch. A father's intuition told him that something was wrong. "You stay here. I think Lily is in trouble. I'm going to look for her." More than 2 miles away, in a remote residential area, Daniel Blackwell's house looked old and dismal. Inside, Daniel was sprawled on the sofa, surrounded by empty beer cans, cigarette butts, and dim light. Janice was out. Kyle, her son from a previous marriage, had just arrived home. His eyes were cold as he looked at the drunk middle-aged man. The atmosphere was tense as usual.
But this time something was different. Since he woke up this morning, Kyle had been hearing whispers in his head. They were incessant and unclear, but persistent like a curse. And tonight, those voices were clearer than ever. "He is not your father. He killed that little girl. Your mom's life was miserable because of him. You have to get justice. He doesn't deserve to live." Kyle clenched his fist. The fury was not his own. It was a soul trapped in hatred. Daniel swore at something, trying to get up. But before he could say anything more, an icy blast of air passed through, like an invisible knife. Kyle saw it. Just a glimpse. The shadow of a woman standing right behind Daniel. Her hair was tangled. Her eyes were murky red. Clara was standing in the corner of the room, silent. No one saw her, but Clara was looking at Kyle with sad eyes, a strange pity. Kyle screamed and lunged at Daniel like a wild animal. He punched, kicked, and knocked him to the floor. Daniel struggled to resist, but his age and the alcohol had left him without strength. Kyle knelt on Daniel's chest, his hand grasping a fruit knife on the table. "You deserve to die. I know what you did. I saw the blood. I saw you kill that little girl." Daniel screamed in panic. "I didn't mean to. I was drunk." She fell and hit her head on the fireplace hearth. "I didn't mean to. You're a murderer." Margaret appeared right behind Kyle, placing a hand on his shoulder. Her voice was as light as a breeze. "Thank you, my son. You did what I couldn't." Clara turned away. She left the room, pulling Lily, who was standing silently on the porch, to follow her. Meanwhile, Bruno led Michael through a small forest, following a trail behind the park. No one spoke. There was only the rustling of leaves and the sound of Michael's heart pounding as they stopped in front of a house he had never been to. Inside, Janice had just returned and found Daniel lying unconscious, his head covered in blood. Kyle was sitting trembling in a corner. She screamed and called for an ambulance. Michael ran inside just in time to see Lily, his daughter, standing on the porch, her eyes staring blankly into space, holding the doll. Clara was no longer there. Margaret had also disappeared. Bruno walked over and lay down in front of Lily, growling in silence, once again becoming a protector for a child who had touched the world of the deceased. An endless, hazy space, like a thick fog, stretched between the boundary of the mortal world and the realm of the dead. Here, the wind did not blow, sounds did not echo, and there was only a chilling stillness. The ground under their feet was a bizarre mixture of memories: dried blood on a wooden floor, a moldy embroidered pillow, and Clara's broken-necked doll. All of them were silent evidence of a painful past. Clara stood there in the form of an innocent little girl, with an old, stained white dress and bare feet covered in dirt. But her eyes had changed. They were no longer soulless and empty. They were clear, full of hesitation, but deep inside was a faint glimmer of defiance. Margaret appeared from a thin black smoke, her hair tangled like a dark cloud, and her eyes were still gloomy, burning with hatred. Her voice was hoarse, like a whisper through years of suffering. "You are wavering, aren't you? I can see it in your eyes, the look of a traitor who is about to betray her own flesh and blood." Clara gently bowed her head, not daring to look her mother in the eye. It's not betrayal. I don't want anyone else to die. Margaret let out a bitter, cold laugh. One more person. Did they have any pity for us, Clara? When you were crying in the basement, when I was begging for help, they covered their ears and turned their faces away. What kind of justice is there in that mortal world? Clara looked up, her eyes welling up with tears, but her voice was pleading. But Lily didn't do anything wrong. She's just a child, just like me back then. Her parents love her. They hug her every day. Margaret roared, her voice dropping, full of resentment. That's why you're jealous. You're clinging to her because she has something you never had. Don't lie to me, Clara. We both see it clearly. Clara was silent for a long time, then sobbed and nodded. Yes, I am jealous, but I don't want her to share the same fate as me. You once said that no one deserves to die the way I did, so why are you doing the same thing to Lily? Margaret moved closer, her voice hissing with hatred. Because this world is a bleeding wound. They live peacefully on our pain. I lived, I sacrificed, I endured, and what did we get in return? Violence, death, and oblivion. So why shouldn't I get justice back? Why do they get to be happy, and we don't? Clara took a step back. Her voice was small but firm, full of resolve. No one is entitled. Happiness is not something to be measured or stolen. They have their own family. They didn't kill me, Mum. My father did that. One person, not the whole world. Margaret was silent. Her breathing was heavy, like a storm howling inside her. She didn't answer directly. She just asked coldly, "So you want to forgive him?" Clara looked down at her hands, where she was holding Lily's doll. "It's not about forgiveness, but I don't want to continue being a part of this hatred. You killed the nurse. You killed the priest. You incited Kyle to attack Daniel. How much more is enough, Mum? Do you think after you kill him you'll feel better? I don't." For a moment, Margaret was terrifyingly silent. "You've changed. You've forgotten who I am." Clara took a step back, her eyes firm. "No, I remember exactly who you are. The person who used to hold me every night, who protected me from my father, who whispered, 'I won't let anyone hurt you again.' You used to protect me. Now let me protect Lily." Margaret's voice caught, as if a dead heart had been stabbed. "You know I can't live without you, Clara." Clara's eyes welled up, and clear tears rolled down her pale cheeks. "Then don't turn me into a ghost like you." Margaret took a step back. Her face changed. It was no longer filled with hatred, but with a sense of uncertainty and confusion. In that moment, Margaret's soul wavered, but it was also from here that a more extreme decision was sparked. If she couldn't have Clara forever, she would drag everyone down to hell together. It had been raining since the afternoon. The early season raindrops that seemed gentle brought with them a bone-chilling cold. The drops fell steadily on the roof, shattering like a silent, frantic warning that tonight was not just a normal rainy night. In Michael's small house, the warm yellow light shone through the foggy glass doors. Rachel was folding clothes in the living room, her fingers moving slowly, trying to find the piece she had lost. Michael sat at his desk, his laptop open, but his eyes were vacant, lost in his heavy thoughts. Lily had just woken up from her nap and was playing with puzzles on the floor. The sound of the pieces clicking together was lonely. Bruno lay in the corner, his eyes not leaving the front door for a second, like a soldier guarding the family's safety. Suddenly, Bruno got up. He didn't howl, he didn't bark. He just stood there, silently, his whole body tense like a bowstring, all of his senses focused on one direction. Knock, knock, knock. 3 knocks echoed on the door. They were slow, hollow, like a sound that did not come from this world. Michael jumped up. The jolt made the chair hit the desk hard. Rachel turned around, her forehead wrinkled with confusion. "Were you expecting anyone?" Michael shook his head. He had forgotten the feeling of being watched that he once had. Bruno stepped to the door, letting out a low growl in his throat, as if to stop him, but the knocking came again. This time it was louder and heavier, like a threat. Michael walked over and opened the door slightly. In front of him was a woman. She was wearing a long black cloak, soaked with rain, her wet hair hanging down and almost covering her face. Only her eyes were visible. They were pitch black and contained a bottomless abyss. "Excuse me," Michael said cautiously. "Who are you?" The woman did not answer right away. Her eyes swept past Michael, a cold and soulless look, then stared straight at Lily, who was playing with puzzles in the living room. Bruno roared, a deep sound from his belly, as if to tear the space apart. I'm lost," the woman said softly. Her voice was low and trembled slightly. I was just passing by and it was raining. I saw the lights on. Rachel walked out and looked at her. This woman did not look like anyone else in the area. There was something too vague and gloomy about her, but to leave someone out in the rain was not right. Honey, should we let her in for a bit? Rachel turned to Michael, her voice hesitant. Michael looked at Bruno. The dog was growling more fiercely, the fur on the back of his neck standing on end. For the first time, Michael saw that look of warning in Bruno's eyes. No, he said firmly. I think it's better if you look for shelter at the police station nearby. The woman did not react, but then she turned around and walked away without any complaint or hesitation. Michael closed the door, but immediately, Bruno started barking wildly. He clawed at the door, howled and ran around, as if sending out one last signal. Danger is coming. Michael frowned, intending to go back out and check, but Rachel called him back. Just leave it. We can call the police tomorrow. They didn't know. Margaret didn't need to get inside the house. She just needed a crack. And tonight, a crack would be opened. It was midnight. The rain fell steadily outside the window. The window in Lily's room was slightly open. The curtain swayed gently, like an invitation. No one remembered to close it. No one checked again. In a moment of carelessness, Margaret had slipped in like a cold smoke, without a sound, without a trace. Lily was sleeping. Clara sat on the edge of the bed, looking down at her. Lily, Clara said softly, do you trust me? Lily nodded slightly in her sleep. Then come with me. There's a place I want to show you. It's very beautiful, very peaceful. In her manipulated subconscious, Lily got out of bed. Bruno howled immediately. He lunged and bit Lily's nightgown, trying to stop the little girl from walking away, but the power of a spirit was too great. Lily looked at him, her face expressionless, her eyes empty. Bruno was flung against the wall. A muffled thud echoed in the darkness. Margaret stood there in the corner of the room, like a faint shadow. No one saw her, only Bruno, and he could not win. The forest at night, after the rain, was unlike any other place on earth. The air was thick like a deadly fog, coiling around the old trees. Green moss crawled up to the dry branches. The leaves dripped slowly, like ancient stories being whispered. The moon was hidden by black clouds, only casting a few faint streaks of light onto the cold gravestones, where time had long ago stopped. Margaret walked, carrying Lily in her arms like a doll in a trance. Her dress dragged on the ground, stained with mud and grey ash from the dilapidated tombs. The wind blew through her black cloak, carrying the wailing sounds that echoed between the stone monuments, as if every soul there was witnessing a forbidden event about to happen. Lily was not awake, but her body was not limp. It was stiff as if she was under a deep spell. Margaret stopped in front of an ancient grave, which had been abandoned for hundreds of years. The tombstone was tilted. The inscription was blurred. Roots had grown through the cracks and formed gnarled black branches like the claws of death. She laid Lily down on the cold stone ground. The little girl gave a soft moan. Bruno howled in the distance, his cry echoing in the still night. Margaret did not turn around. This place is deep enough, quiet enough, so that you will never be stolen again. Bruno was running like crazy through the forest. His fur was soaked, his eyes were red, and his feet were treading on mud, sharp thorns and rotting leaves. He was no longer howling, but growling in broken intervals. It was a cry from his soul. Michael and Rachel were following behind, running and calling their daughter's name. Which way, Bruno? Michael shouted, his voice hoarse and desperate. Bruno stopped, whimpered, and looked toward the old forest, where there was no trail, where there was only darkness and death. Michael swallowed hard, gripping Rachel's hand tightly. We have to trust him. We can't doubt him anymore. The words sounded like a belated confession of guilt. Margaret broke the roots and turned over the moss-covered stones. A small grave alcove appeared underneath. It was just big enough for a child's body. Lily was still not awake. Clara appeared, standing a few steps away. Stop, Mum, Clara said softly. Her voice blended with the sound of the rain still lingering on the leaves. Margaret did not look at the little girl. I lost you. I won't let anyone else steal you again. Lily didn't steal anything. She's just living the way I used to live. No. Margaret froze. I was murdered. I was buried. No one cared. No one looked for me. They live in peace, happily. Why do they deserve it? Because you never forgave. Because you chose anger instead of letting go. Are you taking their side? Margaret roared, her voice echoing with hatred. Clara did not answer. She just walked closer, with a sad look in her eyes. I used to hate, but when I saw Lily smile,
When I saw her in pain because Bruno was hurt, I remembered I used to be like that. Margaret grabbed Lily's hand, intending to push her into the grave. Bruno lunged and slammed hard into Margaret, knocking her to the side. Margaret screamed, her eyes blazing red. She swung her hand out like an invisible whip, lashing Bruno. The sound of breaking bones. Bruno staggered, but still stood in front of the grave. Michael and Rachel arrived just in time. Lily, Rachel screamed, her voice cracking. Margaret was standing there, no longer covering her face, no longer using anyone else's body. Her real face, grey and distorted with hatred, was clearly visible in the fractured moonlight. "It's too late," she hissed. "She will stay, with my daughter." Michael lunged forward. An invisible force threw him backward into the tombstone. Rachel screamed and ran to hug Lily, but Bruno was already standing in front of both of them, whimpering, weak. Margaret moved closer, raising her hand. Clara stopped her. "Enough, Mom." Margaret froze. Clara walked closer, tears streaming down her face. "You used to love me. Why are you making another mother feel the same pain you felt?" Margaret's hands trembled. Clara continued, "How many people have we killed? How much blood? Do you think I'm happy? No, I'm scared. I'm lonely. I miss the sunlight. I miss the singing. I miss you, when you were still my mom." Bruno let out one last howl. His body collapsed. Lily woke up and screamed, "Bruno!" Michael hugged his daughter. Rachel sobbed. Margaret looked at Clara, her hand lowered. I have nothing left." Clara hugged her mother. For the first time, it was not two spirits clinging to each other, but two entities dissolving into each other in tears. There was no more hatred, only regret. A faint light spread out, shining on the empty tomb. Margaret and Clara vanished into nothingness, no longer angry, no longer existing. The next morning, in Michael's backyard, they buried Bruno under the oak tree, where Lily used to play with him every afternoon. Michael held a shovel, silently shoveling the dirt. Rachel sat next to Lily. The little girl was holding the old doll in her arms. It was the first time she held it not out of fondness, but out of memory and love. "I'm sorry, Bruno," Lily whispered. Michael placed a small stone slab on the grave, carving nothing but a dog's paw print in charcoal. He stood up, his eyes red. If only we had listened to him sooner." Rachel nodded, not saying a word. She just squeezed her husband's hand tighter. The sky was still gray, but this time there was no rain. There was only a gentle wind blowing, like an old soul that had just been seen off.
Some pains never go away. Some souls don't need to be punished, but just to be forgiven. And there are some friends like Bruno, who will silently sacrifice everything just to protect a child from a world that humans should never enter. If this story touched you, please leave a comment below. Do you think Margaret deserved to be forgotten, or did we turn her into a demon ourselves? Hit like, subscribe, and share if you want more people to hear Bruno's last howl. We'll see you in the next story, where the line between love and hatred is always as fragile as a knock on the door in the middle of a rainy night. Because sometimes, the scariest ghosts are not the ones who have died, but the ones who used to love you the most.